Speaking of releasing music, if you didn't know, there's a new EP out last Friday. It came out, and a new video just came out literally 15 minutes ago on YouTube of one of the tunes from that new live EP, the live EP Cast of Characters Live in Denton, which was a concert that we recorded just before the lockdown last year in 2020. And that was at UNT, at the University of North Texas. And we played through some of the music from Cast of Characters, the album that had come out. It was supposed to be the kickoff to a longer tour, but the world had other plans for us all. So there's a brand new video out today, and that's called Patience, and it features the great piano playing of Dave Meter. And Dave Meter is also a colleague at the University of North Texas. He is a great pianist and a great educator, and I'm very excited to say that we actually are going to have one more opportunity to get a scholarship for the camp. For those that watch this and maybe thought they might want to win this time, we have one more opportunity coming up, and that'll be announced next week, the first week of June. We will be having an exciting new announcement, new collaboration there for one more Jazz Trombone Boot Camp scholarship, which is super exciting. So that's very, very awesome, and I'm really glad to be able to do that for another person. All right, so the winner of the first one went to Sia Charles, a great young jazz trombonist out in South Africa. So she's going to be joining us. And then today, I'm excited to announce that we're going to be offering the scholarship to Kieran Bonsignore from Rutgers University. So Kieran, if you're watching, if you see this, feel free to get in touch. I'll be emailing you shortly after this to talk about the next steps here. But we're really excited to have you. Thank you for everyone who entered. And I'm sorry we didn't have more this time around, but of course we're going to keep it going next year and try to have even more scholarships. But like I said, we're going to open it up for one more next week, and so just stay tuned for that. Otherwise, get registered if you want to come to the camp. It is filling up, and we can't have unlimited people actually in the camp. We have an auditor level where you can just kind of watch what's going on, which is totally fine if that's what you want to do. We can have a lot of people do that, but in terms of actually being on the call, it gets too many people, and you know how it is. Kevin says, what's the camp going to be like? Will any of it be recorded? Yes, it will be recorded, but only for people that are attending the camp. So it won't be made public. It's only for people that are registering for the camp. So I posted on Instagram kind of a sample schedule for the day. So basically every day was going to include a masterclass that I'll give, kind of about probably something kind of granular. I kind of have an idea of what we're going to do, but I also try to get an idea of what's happening with the students. Next week, I'll be sending out like kind of a info sheet where people can kind of say like what they're working on, what they're trying to learn, all that kind of stuff. So we can kind of cater somewhat of the sessions to what people are thinking about and working on. But we're going to talk about jazz vocabulary, talk about transcription, we're going to talk about learning tunes, all kind of those broad topics, but kind of definitely dialing down into what particularly about those topics people are trying to learn. So basically every day there'll be a warm-up session and getting different approaches to warming up from our TAs, from me, from some of the warm-up stuff I've got out there, some stuff that people are working on, some differences, about what different people do, obviously. And then we're going to have every day we'll have a listening session during our lunch break where we'll talk about just listening together, things to listen for, things that maybe you haven't heard when you've been listening on your own. Every day not every day, but 4 of the 5 days, there's a guest artist masterclass. That's with Michael Davis. That's with Andre Hayward, Vincent Gardner, Steve Davis. Those guys are going to come on and they're going to hear some of our registrants play, and then they're going to hear we're going to ask them questions. They're going to play a little bit. So we get all of that from the artists. And then, like I said, I'll be leading a masterclass every day. And then so we have those kind of 4 sessions. And at the end of the day, we just kind of a Q&A just to kind of wrap up every day and kind of be like, what did he say again? You'll also be getting kind of like a PDF packet of all the exercises that we put together and all the presentations and everything like that. So you'll walk away with not only those videos to go back to, but also a packet to kind of hang on to in terms of exercises and stuff like that. And then obviously just the relationships of everyone else that you meet at the camp. So it's going to be a lot of good times, good hangs. Brian says, is it better for artists to put their albums on streaming platforms, more listeners, but losing money, or not using streaming, making all listeners buy the music, but losing out on listeners who stream? It's a question of your goals and a question of what you're trying to get out of the release. If you don't put it on Spotify, you're losing out, or just streaming in general, you're losing out on a huge percentage of the market. People who want to support the artist directly are going to do that, whether or not they do the streaming or not. But even if I buy a CD, I would like to be able to go on streaming and also stream your music, right? Because then you're actually double dipping. So your biggest fans are going to buy and they're going to stream, right? So you want to get the most people in that category where they want to collect stuff of yours, recordings, and use the technology that's available, streaming. I kind of advise doing both, especially for artists that are in the first part of their career. You've got to go to where people are. You can't expect people to come to you, unfortunately. So you need to go to where they are, and where they are is on the streaming services. And so that means you have to go and put yourself out there on the streaming services. And so if you just decide that your music isn't going to be on there because you think you're going to make more money another way, what you're going to realize is that you just have no reach, and you're not going to be able to get it out to anybody. Is that me saying that I think that they shouldn't pay more? No, I think they should. But the way that their model is, it becomes a difficult conversation. Like, I'm not trying to say Spotify's doing the right thing. You know, they have a certain percentage of monies that are from subscriptions and ads that go to the artists. And so they divide that up in percentages based on how many plays you get. And then it comes out to be crap for most of the independent artists, and the label artists that have negotiated a different deal get a better deal, you know? So the number one thing I can tell you that to do as a young artist, or not even a young artist, but like if you're not a famous artist, you know, is that you have to build up your fan base. Because if you have a fan base, you can basically do whatever you want. If you have 1,000 people who you know are going to buy a CD, a collectible item, maybe it's an LP, maybe it's a t-shirt, you can make stuff and know that you're going to sell it and actually make a return on your investment and be able to start to build. But when you're still in the building phase and you don't have any audience, it's impossible for you to really get anywhere, because you're just spinning your wheels. You're spending money, and then you're taking away the chance for people to connect with you. So that's the goal of streaming. It's like not just to like make a few cents, it's to build your audience. At least that's how I think about it. And that's why we push for playlisting. That's why we push for collaborations. You know, there's a lot of things like that. So, because that's like a huge portion of discovery and a huge portion of being able to make any money off the record, even if it's not as much as we want. But you have to be creative. You know, there's other ways to monetize your music that's not through streaming. There's licensing with using your music for film, video, podcasts, you know, all that sort of stuff. Brian asks, how accurate have you found iRealPro to be when it comes to providing changes? Thoughts on iRealPro in general? It's a great tool. It's really annoying sounding a lot, iRealPro. If I had another option, I would get rid of it in a heartbeat. Especially during this last year, we needed the ability to have some play-alongs. You have to check every lead sheet, I think. I mean, every lead sheet that I look at, whether it's from somebody I trust, whether it's from iRealPro, whether it's from the Real Book, yeah, I put it through the paces and say, what do I think the changes are? What recordings did I listen to? Because like it's always from a version, you know. In my mind, I always try to actually simplify chords down and chord sequences down. So like it might say one thing, but actually I'm like, well, those are tritone substitutes, or those are some other substitute changes that don't have to be there, you know. And so I try to zoom out and look at the big picture view and try to take that big picture view of things. And I couldn't give you a percentage accuracy, but I would never trust any lead sheet. I would always go to the recording and always go to multiple recordings and always find out all the different places where there are different changes. Because then you can identify, in bar 7, I need to listen because I don't know whether this pianist and bass player are going to play this or they're going to play that. So, but regardless, the big picture of like the tonal landing centers are 90% going to be correct anyway. It's always the details. And of course, the devil is in the details, right? That's what sets a great musician apart, is their attention to detail a lot of time, and making sure that they're actually dealing with those details. And that's how you get your own playing better, is by diving into the details and then zooming out, so that those details get better and better and better over time, and then they take care of themselves after a while. Who's your Mount Rushmore of jazz? The 4 absolute most important names. You can defend your 4 picks, but you're not allowed to list any other names. I'm going to say I won't list any other names, but again, this is for me. I'll say I think you can't get away from Louis Armstrong, because that without Louis Armstrong, there's a lot of things that wouldn't have happened. Duke Ellington, there's a lot of reasons there, but I'll say Duke Ellington, 100%. I think you got to say, I'm actually going to say Monk, Coltrane. And obviously this leaves out a bunch of people. I think that the people that I picked influenced so many other people that you could kind of draw the connections from there. So what did I say? I said Louis Armstrong, I said Duke Ellington, I said Monk, and then I said Coltrane, John Coltrane. All right, Brian, do you think there are original rhythms for each standard? If someone called a tune, are people usually on the same page when it comes to the rhythm of the melody? I don't know that they are on the same page all the time. I think that goes to knowing the lyrics, if there's lyrics. I'll say that if it's a jazz tune, like Confirmation, there's a generally accepted like rhythmic or generally accepted rhythm of the melody. But I would say with like a standard, you have to know the lyrics and how the lyrics get phrased. That's what defines the melody to me. You can do a lot, but you wouldn't breathe in the middle of a word, or you wouldn't like awkwardly say one word really fast and then stretch out the forever, right? So you gotta just like have some awareness. I don't know all the lyrics to all standards that I know, but I do know when I learned the melodies, I did try to learn them from a source that had words as well as non-words so that I could know how it was phrased. Left hand pain. Oh, you're talking about trombone left hand pain? You got to find a way to hold your trombone where it's not hurting you. What that tells me is you're probably squeezing too hard. I think it happens a lot to people that play a trigger horn, and sometimes people use it like a brace. Steve Turre always used to talk about making a gripper for his horn, which would be like more contoured to your hand. So check it out. This is something I had to think about. When you hold the trombone, if you hold your hand this way, if your elbow is out, you're putting a lot of pressure here on your wrist. And so like some people use like a paddle to put on the backside of their wrist, and then some people use like a strap. Robin Eubanks has a strap. Other bass trombonists have a strap. If you shift your arm from diagonal to upright, so this is Steve had me do this too, was like, think about it, like the more you get your elbow kind of underneath, it's not 100% underneath because that's a little unnatural really, but like if it's straight, then all of a sudden all the weight from your horn is transferred down into your arm and not into your left hand, and you don't have to squeeze. But a lot of this happens, a lot of the pain I find comes from people with trigger horns or bass trombone players, either from the extra weight or just the weird way that they have their arm kind of contorted to hold it. Try to get your arm to support the weight of the horn and try to relax your fingers. DJ asked, if you had to release an album of all classical trombone solo rep, what pieces would you pick? I would not pick the Tomasi. I don't like that one. I've always liked Andante and Allegro. I know it's kind of like played out. I like the Grundal Concerto. I mean, the David is classic. I don't know if I would record that one. The Hindemith has kind of grown on me. I always like the Schulich. Probably some like weird, there's this piece called, what's it called? Red Balloons by Jim Pugh and Dave Taylor. It's like some weird stuff. And there's some like Michael Davis like stuff that's like goes with like a tape, like a play along, I guess, but it's like a piece, a classical piece. I'm not going to make a classical record though. I'd probably do a quartet too. I'd rather do that. Like the Slide Monsters thing is super cool. I do love a good trombone ensemble. What standard do you think should be played more at jam sessions? This is an interesting concept because it's always different depending on where you go. Like certain tunes, different areas, different people play different tunes. Like in some places, but then it also shifts like over time. Like there was a bunch of tunes that I always thought were like Eastman tunes, but then now people don't play them so much anymore. There was like a bunch of tunes people played in Tallahassee. Anyone that spent a good amount of time in New Orleans, they call tunes like Ellis Marsalis tunes, like Swinging at the Haven. That comes to mind. Magnolia Triangle is like this New Orleans tune also. I never heard that called in New York. So I think it depends. But then like you go to Boston and everybody is playing like more Wayne tunes, right? So I don't know. See more Cedar Walton tunes. That would be cool to hear at jam sessions. There's my answer. In New York, people play Cedar Walton tunes. So I don't know. But when you get outside of New York, people don't know sometimes like the hard bop stuff. The Beyond Song for My Father, Horace Silver tunes. There's a lot of great Horace Silver tunes that are, what players can you identify from a single note, and is the quality of being that identifiable / having that unique of a sound important one to me? I'll say that it was not always the case that I could do this, and I think you have to get to a certain level of familiarity with an artist. At this point, I would say there's a lot of people that I could identify with one note, but people that have super identifiable sounds to me. But, I think Train, Miles, well, also with Miles, it like really depends on what era you're talking about. Train for sure. I mean, JJ, for me, I can recognize JJ Curtis slide pretty easily. Carl Fontana has a very recognizable sound. Or it could be an imitator, at this point. There's a lot of those imitators. Piano, it's hard to tell from the sound, but you can tell from the vocabulary. A drummer, you can kind of tell by the ride cymbal pattern and how they space the beat. At least that's how I hear it, because I don't hear the touch the same way. But I've always put that in a high regard, that like I want people to be able to know who it is, or I also want to be able to know who it is, and that play in such a way that it would be able to be translated for those that were paying attention. I wouldn't expect anyone that's not like a jazz, somebody that's really into it, to be able to identify like players. But like as a player, you should be able to identify your heroes, But it took me a while. I guessed wrong. Coltrane a bunch of times. Brecker, you can kind of tell, but there's so many Brecker clones too that, it's the same as like, to me, it was like learning how to identify harmony. Like the extensions of a dominant chord is a similar way to how I learned how to identify people's sounds. I don't think you can do it without experience. You listen to a lot of Coltrane, you can always recognize it. You listen to a lot of Bird, you always know when it's a Bird and when it's not, especially after you've studied it. I think Joshua Redman has an identifiable sound. How do you come up with titles for composition and albums? That is a complicated scenario. I don't have a system. I always recommend to my students, though, I always recommend that they go like write the titles down as they occur to them and have like a document, but I usually go with like the vibe of the piece and the emotional content of the piece and like what should it be called, kind of based around that rather than a clever title, because punny titles they're funny and clever, but at a certain point they become pretty nerdy and not very relatable to an audience. Alton asks if I ever upgraded my interface. Yeah, I have two. I have a setup at school and I have a setup at home. At home, I have this Zoom L8. It has 8 inputs, obviously. That's why it's called 8. But then I just have a Focusrite 2-channel one. At school, there's so much stuff that's like pretty okay that it doesn't matter that much unless you want to spend a lot of money to make it sound really, really good. So I've kind of given up on like doing a bunch of research about it. I was going to get like a Universal Audio stuff, but it was just so much more expensive. I'm as a producer for records, I'm pretty experienced at like listening to stuff and hearing what I want to change, but the actual like technical details of like the frequency and what to do to the frequency to get the result is not always my strength. So I can like articulate it to an engineer, but I need somebody to help. So for me, I'm always going to have that kind of collaborative thing. I think, maybe it's something I'll probably learn over time. When you were at Eastman, what do you remember working on the most in the practice room? How did you balance your routine between standards and technique? It was 80% trombone stuff, especially then. You got to have, for trombone at least, you have to have a level of mastery of the instrument to be able to express your ideas. And so to me, that means playing classical repertoire, having a good sound, playing in tune, playing in time, having good articulation. All of that stuff comes before you even play jazz, And I think it's true of many instruments. Everybody has their own experience, but you can't. On trombone, you can't. If you don't have good technique, you can't play a JJ solo. You can't play a Curtis solo. If you don't have good technique, you don't have good articulation, you don't have a good sound. You just can't do it. So to me, that's what 80% of practicing trombone, jazz, to me, is practicing trombone. The other 20% is, learning tunes, learning vocabulary, learning music. And then there's a whole other side that's like, playing the piano, understanding harmony, learning harmony, et cetera, et cetera. But I also think it depends on your instrument. Like as a guitarist or as a pianist or as a bass player, for sure, you have to know lots of tunes. So that's something that maybe is more in the forefront of your mind. Not that trombonists shouldn't know tunes, but just in terms of the gigs that you're going to play, you're going to have a lot more reading gigs as a trombone player than trio standards gigs. Does equipment really matter? Horn, mouthpiece, like the most comfortable horn and mouthpiece versus making the best out of good equipment. Yeah, man, I'm pretty much of the opinion that the equipment is just one part of it. It's not really that important. It's like when you get into the nuances of like executing a certain thing or executing in a certain way or like having a certain sound for a certain situation, then equipment becomes a more important part of the conversation, perhaps. But in general, I would just say 80% is not about the horn. So if somebody's trying to say you're going to sound better if you switch horns, that might be true, and it also might not be true. It just depends where you're at in your process. But I'll tell you this. When I was finishing my undergrad, I wanted to get a new horn as a graduation present to myself. And I asked everybody in my life that was like, oh, what do you want for graduation? Or they wanted to instead of giving me money, wanted them to help me make a purchase of a new instrument. And everybody was on board because, they wanted it to go towards something like that. And so when I went to get the instrument, I focused on ease of playing. And when I did that, I thought that it was supposed to be easy to play everything or anything. And so I made my decisions kind of based around that idea and that restraint and that concept. Became the most frustrating thing about the instrument is that it did exactly what I wanted really well and couldn't do anything else. So for me, that was extremely frustrating, and why I ended up making a change to a horn that some people might say is not as good, quote unquote, by some standard. But for me, it allows me to do more things well than what I was playing before. So for me, it's the sound, and I need to have that ability to get a sound and go for the sound and not worry so much about making it easy, because you can make it easy by being a better player. An equipment change is a last ditch effort. I literally played that instrument for 4 or 5 years and kept thinking it's me. It's got to be me. It's got to be me. I'm doing something wrong. I'm doing something wrong. And once I literally tried to get better at every single thing, then I went to the equipment. It's important to go for the sound and go for the result that you want. If you want to have a bigger sound, you probably got to play a bigger horn. By bigger, I mean more diffuse. You can get a big sound on a small horn, but if you're a person that's like, oh well, I only want to play in the upper register, so I'm going to get a small horn, and then you neglect the low, it's like things compound. So I think you should be able to do everything, because you never know what a gig situation is going to call for. You don't want to be like, well, I can't do that. I don't ever want to have to tell somebody that. Ryan asks, do you have any advice for musicians starting to get into jazz? Yes, listen to a lot of jazz. Make sure you're listening to the type of music that you're trying to learn. Sometimes people say they want to learn jazz, but then they listen to stuff that's not jazz. You want to listen to this type of stuff that you're trying to learn, that you're trying to play, the people that you want to play with. Try to figure out what the end goal is there and just dive right in and learn solos, learn repertoire, learn style through recordings. Don't worry about buying any books. Just go to the recordings, listen, transcribe, learn from the recordings. That's the best thing I can tell you. And start improvising. And just getting over that fear of improvising, getting a love for the music, a sense of the beat, a sense of the flow. That's the most important thing, is getting jazz inside of your brain. Just like if you're going to speak a foreign language, you have to listen to that language and how it's spoken to be able to speak it well, or else, what it sounds like when someone speaks to you in a broken version of your language. So that's what it sounds like to a jazz musician when you just sort of know a little bit of vocabulary and you kind of play it awkwardly in a tune. Like it sounds like someone speaking a broken language to you. Taylor, do you listen to any music podcasts or any outside of music? Yeah, I've been listening to audiobooks recently, but I do listen to podcasts. I always liked that Reply All podcast, but that had a unfortunate turn. I listened to Tim Ferriss's podcast. I've gone down little rabbit holes with different podcasts. Some of the when Serial came out, I listened to that. But yeah, I switched to audiobooks because I was realizing that sometimes podcasts sometimes they're just conversations and they're just not as in-depth maybe or thoughtful. Some are very thoughtful, but sometimes it's just, random stuff. And I was I need to be more efficient about what I'm putting into my brain, not just volume. Being a little more thoughtful about what goes into my brain, I guess. Just to recap, but the big announcement for today is our scholarship winner for the MARCINKIEWICZ Jazz Trombone Bootcamp Scholarship. And the first winner was Sia Charles from Cape Town, South Africa. And we're going to have also Kieran Bonsignore. He had a very, very thoughtful application video that he submitted, and he's from Rutgers University in New Jersey. And so we're going to welcome them to the camp, the Jazz Trombone Boot Camp. That's June 14 through 18. So they're just a little over 2 weeks to get registered for that if you want to join us. So please do that. nickfinzer.store. You'll see the link at the top of the page. And like I said, we're going to have another opportunity, another collaboration with a company to offer another scholarship, I think, next week. So stay tuned for that. John asks, you recently released recording A Sorcerer. Reminds me a little bit of Radiohead's Pyramid Song. Are they an influence to your music? I was never a huge Radiohead fan, but I have obviously listened to Radiohead. And when Of Rainbows came out, there was a lot of stuff that came with that, which meant that like I was definitely paying attention. And then interestingly, and related to that, is with my nonprofit, the Institute for Creative Music, something that we've done for a long time since we started in 2011 is use popular tunes as a gateway into improvisation. And so we use Radiohead tunes. Unfortunately, like the kids don't know them anymore, so they're not that popular. So we got to find some new material. But yeah, I've used Radiohead as an entry point into improvisation in the past a bunch. How do you go about playing in odd keys, considering most of the time we stay around the B flat, F, E flat, A flat, D flat? You play in those keys. You have to get equally familiar. I like to think about a tune like Cherokee, for example. This is a great reason to know all your keys. Like you got to play in B, A, and G in the key if you call that tune in B flat. So playing like a tune like that in 12 keys, you get all the easy keys, the bridge is hard. All the hard keys, the bridge is easy. You got to just know them all equally well, because you don't want to be like, oh, I can't play in that key, I can't play in this key. But I think you hear new things in different keys because it's ways different on the trombone. So how do I go about it? I play in different keys. I have a scale workout and mode workout that I do with my students that tries to get you familiar with those keys, but you got to do the work. That's all you can do to it. It is now the year 2050, and science now allows us to upload the ability to play exactly like any jazz musician into your brain. Would you, under any circumstances, take advantage of this technology? And if this is a ridiculous question, I think it would be interesting to see what would happen if you had like Michael Brecker's brain playing a trombone. That would be super interesting, or something like that, or like Herbie. So yeah, sure, I'll take advantage of the technology. It would be Herbie Chick, Brecker, something like that. Somebody who like doesn't play trombone, and like what would happen if that vocabulary got translated onto the trombone. I think that's because that's like where I would hope someday to be able to play like. But do you think social media will still be helpful for promoting gigs 20 years from now? I don't think so, because it's going to be something else in 20 years, And I don't think it's that good for promoting gigs now anyway. Social media is good for developing a relationship with people, not trying to advertise to them on a platform that's not intended for advertising. If you want to advertise people to come to your gig, you should advertise. You should not commingle your advertising and your professional like portfolio. Make it about selling if it's about selling. Make it about music if it's about music. Like all those things should be about that one thing. But if you're just constantly on social media, like come to my gig, come to my gig, come to my gig, it's going to be difficult to keep people engaged with your stuff. That's all. Not that you can't do it, but I don't think people respond to it in that way. The better way to do it is like for people to want to come because they're interested in you anyway, and that they would know that you were doing stuff. And that goes back to the bigger question of how do you develop an audience and how do you really engage with them on the long term, which is more important than any one gig, in my opinion. There will be something else, a new version of social media in 20 years. So I don't know what it'll look like, but I don't know. All the same stuff is going to happen on every platform, which is people trying to share their art, people trying to get people to buy stuff, and people trying to connect and communicate, and then people trying to get people to do things, try to advertise to them. So whatever form it takes is going to have different best practices. So you just got to stay on top of those things. So congrats again to our winners of the scholarship. I'm very excited to welcome you to Jazz Trombone Bootcamp in a couple of weeks. And if anyone wants to get on board for that, it'll be happening in June 14th through June 18th, and it's going to be great. All right, thank you so much, everybody. I appreciate you being here. We'll be back. Yeah, next Friday we'll be back. Might have to take a couple weeks break after that, but we'll be back next Friday, June 4th, with another live stream. So I hope you had a fantastic week, and I hope you have a great long weekend. If you're in the U.S., it's Memorial Day weekend, so we'll be having a nice long weekend. Anyway, I'm going to sign off, and have a good one, and we'll catch you next time.